can get a little bit boring. So maybe to add a little bit of energy, I'll just kind of pace left and right. Now, if you have engaged in the Islamic context for even a few minutes, terms like the Prophet said, the Prophet did, or in a hadith is something you will hear and something you hear frequently. So I thought of presenting to you what hadith is, right? An introduction to this idea that we term as hadith. And so I'm going to go through it, just a few slides. I'm trying to summarize all of it for you in a way that is easy to digest, but enough for you to actually understand what is meant by the term hadith and why it's important. If at any time you want me to pause and repeat something, if you want me to slow down, raise your hand and let me know. All right? Don't wait until the end to ask again. If something doesn't make sense, then assume it doesn't make sense for other people as well. If you feel like I'm going too fast, then assume I'm going too fast for other people as well. Get the reward and do the favor for everyone by letting me know, hey, slow down, or can you re-explain what you just said? So we'll go in. So we start with what is hadith? What do we mean by this? This is kind of going in and out. A hadith is essentially something that the Prophet said or something that he did, and what he said or what he did was seen or heard by what we call a companion, somebody around him. So there was somebody in the Prophet's physical proximity near to him, and while he was with the Prophet, he heard the Prophet saying something, or he saw the Prophet ﷺ doing something, and then this individual goes and shares that information with others. All right? So for example, I'm standing in front of you. And let's say, while I'm standing in front of you, I come here and I assume this is chai and I drink it. All observed me doing this. Now imagine you go back to someone, you share this information. I saw this person named Tarik drink chai while talking about hadith. This is actually what's happening, but the one who's being observed is who? The Prophet. That's what makes it a hadith. Right? So when you hear somebody say in a hadith, they're essentially saying something that the Prophet said or something that the Prophet did, and that information was observed by someone in his presence and then shared with other people. Right? And the sciences of hadith, and notice that I plural, it's sciences, essentially is the attempt to study this aspect of the faith that goes back to the actions and the statements of the Prophet. So when we say the science or the sciences of hadith, we are attempting to understand something the Prophet said or something that he did. And it's science in sciences plural, not just science. It's because there are multiple disciplines that need to be studied in order to properly study hadith. And I'll get to this in a little bit. All right. So we're looking at multiple things here. What is the value of studying hadith? All right. How many people here has heard someone say the following? I only need the Quran, I only take from the Quran. Has anyone heard this? I only need from the Quran, I only take from the Quran. Who's heard this? Raise your hand up. I've heard this. Have already heard this. Now, it sounds nice. The Quran, it's the Quran, it's the Word of God. And yeah, this person's really serious about the Quran. But what they really mean is, that's what they're really saying.
Budget cuts. We'll do a fundraiser for the audio app.
reason why it's doing that. Test. Test. All right. Well, hopefully this is better. If this isn't good, we'll go with the hand. I'll be dual wielding here. See how to make that work. It's not gonna be this.
All right, who'll start this fundraiser off? $1,000 for the audio, huh? Who'll start?
No problem. Okay, so inshallah, this is better. Many of us have heard this, and while on the surface it sounds nice, it sounds like this person is so dedicated and so entrusting of the Quran, but what they're actually saying is, I reject this. And so, in order to really care about Hadith, we need to understand the value that comes with studying this. And this is by no means the end all be all. I'm just giving you 3 very important points in this regard. There are definitely more than just 3. For one, the Prophet, ﷺ, peace be upon him, is a reflection of God, as well as a reflection of God's word, the Quran. What do I mean by that? What I mean is the following. To better understand how God engages his creation, you look at how the Prophet engaged people. If you want to better understand what it means to live by the Quran, to incorporate the Quranic teachings in your life, you look at the Prophet. Because the Prophet, as described by his wife, Aisha, may God be pleased with her, she described him as a walking Quran, meaning everything he did was in accordance to the book, the Word of God. And what I mean by he is a reflection of God himself, I don't mean he's God manifest or that God's spirit is in him or anything like that, but rather the Prophet, while a prophet, only acted in ways that go back to what God wants him to do. And so something that I actually learned very recently is that if you want to know what God thinks of you, then imagine walking up to the Prophet and talking to him. Imagine you did a sin, you did something wrong, and you really want to gauge how bad is this? Imagine going to the Prophet and telling him, hey, I did this. What would his reaction be? That's what I mean in terms of he is a reflection of who God is. So, if we want a better relationship with the Quran, by default, we need to look at the physical manifestation of the Quran, and that is the Prophet. And if we want to better understand who God is and what I mean to him and what he should mean to me, you look to the Prophet. So somebody who comes and says, I only need the Quran, they have essentially severed themselves from the Quran itself. Number 2, the Prophet is our role model. Emulating him better equips the believer with a stronger ability to navigate life. So we all have our personal challenges, right? We all have our difficulties. Some of them are minor, some of them are pretty stressful. Now, imagine if you had the opportunity to go to the Prophet himself and say, I have this problem. What's the solution? What can I do? Now, what do you think the Prophet is going to offer you? Is he going to offer you a meaningful solution? Are you going to leave that setting with your problem unresolved? Absolutely not. Your problem is going to be resolved. Guaranteed. Right? Now, we don't have the opportunity to physically go and ask the Prophet, but we have the opportunity through Hadith to at least get an idea of what he would tell us. So, the man who has the solutions to all of the problems, he has the best advice on how to engage life, engage situations. We have been left with a compilation of his statements and his behaviors, his actions, so that we, by learning them, can better navigate this life. The other day, my son has these friends in the mosque. My son wasn't there, but one of his friends came to me and said, can you play tag with us? And this is Aisha. It's like it's night. I'm tired. I want to go home. And my son is not there, right? I really want to go home. And he's like, no, play tag with us. Play tag. I don't have time to play tag with a 3, 4-year-old. But then I just asked myself the question: if the Prophet was here right now, and this kid asked him to play tag with him, what would the Prophet do? And the answer is the Prophet would have played tag with him. So this 3-year-old was holding my finger, right, and dragging me around and taking me places where he wants to play tag. And here I am, the Imam of the Masjid, walking around with a kid, pretty much dictating where I'm about to go. But I felt so much pride because the Prophet was described as having kids. Kids would go to him, grab his hand, and the Prophet would just walk with the kid wherever he goes or she goes. So knowing what the Prophet did through a hadith helped me navigate that situation. Now, it's a very mundane situation, right? If I said no, nothing bad is going to happen. But the idea is, I think I was able to make a better decision. In fact, I know I made a better decision because of what I know of the Prophet, right? So the more we know hadith, the more we equip ourselves with the insight, the perspective, the wisdom, the guidance to be able to navigate life. And number 3, hadith helps us better understand the Quran, right? And I mentioned this. If you want to know how you should look as a result of implementing the Quran, look to the Prophet. If you want to know if this Shaykh, this Imam, this community leader, this religious leader is really trustworthy, because this is a big question. Anybody nowadays with social media can grow a beard, stand in front of a camera, and say things. Right? I have seen YouTube videos of people portraying themselves as scholars, and you can see their eyes reading from a monitor. But the deception that the image that they're trying to portray is, I know this stuff by heart. No, you're reading it. So how do I know that this person is trustworthy? Well, you look at the extent to which they reflect the behaviors of the Prophet. If somebody really reflects the behaviors of the Prophet, you know there's something good going on. And by the way, it has nothing to do with dress. People come and say, I dress like this because Rasulullah, the Prophet, used to dress like this. No. The Prophet wore any clothing he had available. He wore Arab clothing. He wore Roman clothing. He wore Persian clothing. He wore Yemeni clothing. He wore whatever was available. So don't be deceived by the outward imagery, but rather look at the individual when it comes to their behaviors. How do they interact with people? How do they talk to people? Somebody who, you find these people who are always criticizing others, always criticizing Muslims. You this, you that, you this, you that. And if there's a debate or a discussion, they're always talking over the other person. Well, what does hadith teach us? It teaches us that the Prophet, peace be upon him, when somebody else would be speaking, he would not interrupt them, even if the one speaking was an enemy of God. And even if the one speaking was speaking in a way to deceive others from God, he would let them finish. So when somebody comes and they're portraying themselves as Shaykh, as Imam, as a religious leader, and they're constantly interrupting other people in a debate, I'm not saying they're evil, but you're not exactly implementing the Quran. So don't come to us saying, I am, giving you the Quran, and I'm coming and I'm teaching you the Quran, and I'm on the truth. No. Act like it, and then say you're on the truth. All right? So again, these are 3 benefits to really show us the value of knowing hadith. Now, I think we can all agree this is extremely valuable, and we should all aspire towards these things in our lives. Next, the history of hadith. All right? And this is very important. So I want you all to imagine yourselves living amongst the Prophet, peace be upon him. You're living amongst him. Every now and then, you have the opportunity to go and sit with him, to go and pray behind him, Every now and then, the Prophet is walking along, doing his human things, going to the market, sitting with people, having conversations, and you participate in that. Now, you love the Prophet, peace be upon him. You absolutely adore him. So naturally, what are you going to do when you go home to your family? What? Not just you're going to mimic him. You're going to share with your family the things he said and what you saw of him. That's out of love. So, Hadith formally begins during the time of the Prophet. And I want you all to remember this. Hadith began not 100 years after the death of the Prophet, because people who deny Hadith will come and say, oh, it started 100 years later. No, no, no. It started during the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Why? Because I just mentioned, if you love the Prophet, naturally you're going to share what you heard from him and what you saw of him with the people around you. Naturally, you're going to do that. However, early on, the Prophet prohibited the companions from writing down the things he said. Why? So that the companions or the believers don't accidentally mistake what the Prophet said for being what? For being Quran. So that these two things don't get mixed. All right? So the Prophet ensured that anything that is written in his city that is religious was known to be Quran. It could only be Quran, because that's the only thing they were allowed to write. But later on in his life, the Prophet said, relay, narrate, share what I say, even if it's just one verse. So once the companions understood the sensitivity that's at hand, the importance of preserving the Quran and separating it from the statements of the Prophet then said, go ahead and write down what I say. Share what I say. And some of the companions knew how to write. Not all of them, some of them did. And so those who knew how to write would write what the Prophet used to say. All right? So for those who come and say, oh, it came 100 years later, that's absolutely not true. And you have many examples of hadith being shared, actions of the Prophet, statements of the Prophet being shared during his life. So one example is the following. Earlier in Islam, earlier in the prophethood, they used to face Jerusalem as their qibla, as their position of prayer. Today, what do we face? We face Mecca, right? Prior to that, they used to face Jerusalem. All right, so when they were in the prophet's city, they would face north, because north is Jerusalem. Until verses in the Quran came down in the second chapter, telling the prophet and telling the believers to face Mecca. So a companion prayed with the prophet facing Mecca. He goes out and he finds a group of Muslims praying towards Jerusalem. So he tells them, I was just with the Prophet and we prayed towards Mecca. The position of prayer has been changed. So while in prayer, they were facing north, they all turned around to face south, which is Mecca. What does this tell us? That the companions shared what the Prophet did and said, and they accepted it. Does that make sense? All right. And then we say that the companions after the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, continued to share his statements. One example is a companion went to Omar ibn Khattab and knocked on his door. Once, he knocked a second time, and he knocked a third time, and after the third one, he left. Now, Omar was in the house. So when the companion left, the guy left, he called him back and said, why did you leave? And he said, I heard the Prophet say, knock 3 times. If you don't get an answer, leave. So Omar said, You're narrating something here. You're claiming the Prophet said something. You need to support your claim and bring witnesses, other people who heard the Prophet say that as well. So what am I offering you here? An example that the companions, after the death of the Prophet, continued to share and to practice what they saw the Prophet say and do that isn't mentioned in the Quran. Does that make sense? No? Yes? If it makes sense, give me a thumbs up. Right? Okay. So remember, we're going over a brief history of Hadith. Now, we went through the life of the Prophet, what was going on then. After the death of the Prophet, during the companion's life. You have a question? Oh, there's a big reason. All of the second chapter is technically dedicated to that. And it takes a little bit of time to explain, but I'll try and summarize it. The question is, why did the position of prayer change? Right? And the reason is to send a message to the world that Muslims are independent in their theology. We are an independent community. We are not a branch or an offshoot of Christianity or Judaism. Nor do we face Mecca out of tribal pride. So the Arabs, they glorified Mecca because Abraham goes back to it. So it was a tribal thing, like a lineage thing. So by first facing Jerusalem and then going back to Mecca, it's essentially a message to the Arabs that our facing of Mecca has nothing to do with tribalism, has everything to do with theology. All right? So it is a message to the global community that we as Muslims, we are independent in our identity. And there's a way, I can explain that more, but for the sake of time, I'll keep it at that. All right. Okay, so what was going on in the time of the Prophet? What was going on right after his death? Now fast forward it about 100 years, about 10 decades. Here we have a caliph by the name of Omar II who commissions some of the top scholars to compile hadith. Now, I'm underlining this word compile because it's very important. People they'll come and say, hadith began 100 years later. No. What happened 100 years later is the compilation of hadith, not the narration of hadith. What's the difference? When I narrate hadith, I am sharing what I heard. So the companions heard things from the Prophet, and they shared it with other people, right? Compiling means, I have a book right here. I'm going to collect what people have said, the Prophet said and did, and compile it in a book. You see the difference? It's a very important point. You see the difference? Thumbs up if you see it. Okay, let me repeat it again. When I narrate a hadith, I am essentially sharing with someone what I heard the Prophet said. And we said that this was happening since when? Since the time of the Prophet. But what they weren't doing is writing all of these statements in a book, like in a journal. Like today I heard the Prophet say this, and today I heard the Prophet say that, and yesterday I heard the Prophet say this. And they have a type of a book with all these different statements. That wasn't happening until 100 years later. So at this time, Omar II finds the top scholars to do what? To gather all that's being shared about the Prophet and to start documenting it in a book form. Right? Is that clearer? Yes? Should I continue? Okay. Can you repeat? Okay. Then, hadith continues to circulate, right? But then problems start to come up. What are the problems? By now, the borders of the Muslim world has expanded tremendously. And being included in the Muslim project or the Muslim experience are people who are born after the death of the Prophet. So they didn't have the opportunity to see the Prophet. And you have people who are of different cultures. You have the Persians coming in, you have some Romans coming in, you have North Africans coming in and whatnot, who aren't familiar with the kind of the technicalities of sharing hadith. So how do we make sense of this? Like, what does it mean that the Prophet said something? Like, oh, how do I know? What does that mean? Also, not everybody is pure of heart, right? The companions were pure of heart by testimony of God in the Quran, but after them, you can have liars, can't you? You can have deceivers, can't you? So what starts to happen is, let's say I'm an apple. I sell apples. I'm in the market. I sell apples. You know, I'm a business person. What do business people always try and do? What? Sell. And they're okay with putting their ethics and their morals aside to make profit, right? So I'm an apple vendor, and I now write on my wall, there's like a paper on my wall that says, the Prophet said, eat apples because it's good for you. Wouldn't you buy it if the Prophet said it? Right? Why do we always eat dates? Why do we eat dates when we break our fast in Ramadan? That's what the Prophet did. When we go and do pilgrimage, if for those who have done it, whether the smaller or the bigger, what do we drink a lot? Zamzam, the water over there. Why? Because the Prophet said so. So I could just say the Prophet said to eat apples. It's good for you, and people are going to buy. Right? That's how believers are. That's how Muslims are. That's our attachment to the Prophet. So you have people who are lying about what the Prophet said in order to get something out of it. Right? So you have that challenge as well. Also, you have the challenge of just humanness. If I'm, let's say I'm a upstanding individual, I'm not a bad person, I don't have an agenda behind me, but I'm a human being and I forget. I say the Prophet said X, Y, and Z, but I actually, I'm mistaken, I forgot. How many times have you said, oh, I thought you said this, and you just forgot? Or I forgot that you said this. That's humanness. So you have this challenge of, well, people are saying the Prophet ﷺ said, peace be upon him, said, and they could forget, they could make a mistake, right? Possible? Yes. So you have these challenges coming about. So what do we do? Now for the hadith deniers, they say, oh, this is a big problem, let's just go ahead and get rid of hadith. When the scholars come, they say, why don't we make a system? Let's create a system and a method for filtering out a hadith that we can rely on and a hadith that we cannot rely on. Can we do this? This is now the project of scholars. Is there a way? Is there a method that we can use to verify the authenticity of what's being shared about the Prophet, peace be upon him? And so they go on this system. And I'll share it with you, I think in the next slide. Yeah, the next slide. We'll go over it. But before that, there are some features that the scholars incorporate here. Number one, the initial assumption about anything attributed to the Prophet is that it is false. Now they say innocent until proven guilty. We're familiar with this, right? Innocent until proven guilty. In hadith, it is false until proven otherwise. So the assumption is that when anyone says the Prophet said X, Y, and Z, we assume it is false, it is not true. We don't incorporate it in our faith. We don't practice it until it goes through our methodology, our system, and we see that, you know what, it is actually true. So that's the first feature. And this is very important because people come and say, oh, this is all hearsay. If we play telephone right now, we're about, 30, 40 people here. If we start with Brother Jamal and he gives us a statement, by the time it reaches the last individual, it's probably going to be nothing in terms of what Jamal said, right? So people say it's hearsay. No. we have a system to verify. And I'll go over that with you, inshallah. The second feature of this methodology is that it is testable. It is testable. So in science, in the scientific method, have you heard of this? The scientific method? They taught us this back in like 9th grade and whatnot. You have these researchers come, they research something. They research the impact of trans fats on human health, let's say. Trans fat on human health. So you have a researcher do their studies, do their research, do their, their labs, and they come with some conclusions. Now, if they present this to, let's say, the CDC, and this is just one study, is the CDC now going to incorporate that in their recommendations or something? No. What needs to happen before that? Other researchers need to be able to replicate what the first one did and find the same results. Once there are multiple studies, all using the same process and coming to the same results, then what do they say? This is reliable. So they incorporate it in their broader recommendations for America, for example. Similarly, this method of filtering reliable hadith from not reliable hadith requires that other scholars are able to test the findings of the first scholar. They're able to replicate it. All right? And this is incredibly important. So, up until here, are there any questions? Anything you'd like me to expand on a little bit? Go ahead. Okay, so the question is, how often are these tests made? And currently, do people test hadith, right? And the answer is, these hadith were tested so much to where scholars became very confident of the results. All right? In terms of our times today, yes, there continues to be people who test it, but not as much. And I'll tell you why. Science is always discovering new things. There's always new information, new factors that are being introduced to science that now need to be looked into. So science is an endless field of information. There will never be a point in science where we know it all. There's no other piece of information to discover. When it comes to hadith, the amount of statements and actions the Prophet did are what? Are limited. In other words, we're not going to find something new. There's nothing new to be found. What the Prophet has said and did has all been accounted for. And since the Prophet passed away, there's nothing new to come. So there was a point in time where the science of hadith and the verification of hadith kind of came to a soft end, because there's no more hadith out there. Someone who comes and says, oh, I found a scroll somewhere in a mountain that brings a new hadith, that's not going to happen. Does that make sense? But generally, yes, there are still scholars today who look into this, and they will come to conclusions in terms of especially hadith, where scholars differ over the strength of the hadith. Does that answer your question? Okay, you're welcome. Yes. Yes. Yeah, there could be misspelling here. Where is it? The authenticity, yes, the authenticity of a hadith. By the way, Brother Jamal has a slide, so he could share it with you all, inshallah. So don't be so frantic about writing down exactly what's there. We'll give it to you, inshallah. Any other questions? Now we get into the kind of the fun part. How does a hadith look? It looks like this. All right. Hadith looks like this. Yahya, name of a person. In fact, I should have used more common names. Bob heard from John, who heard from Michelle, who heard from, give me a name, Sheila. Sheila, who heard the Prophet say, actions are based on intention. That is the picture of a hadith. Now, this is an actual real one, right? But Bob heard from John, who heard from Michelle, who heard from Sheila, and Sheila heard the Prophet say, actions are based on intention. This is a hadith. Okay? So, the scholars needed to develop a way of determining whether this is authentic or not. How do they do it? There are three, not only three, but there are three critical factors. You have this, what is this? It's technically blue. Right? You have these blue arrows, you have these orange arrows, and you have this green arrow. A hadith has three primary components that need to be analyzed in depth. The blue arrows are bigly biographical studies. In other words, in order to determine if this hadith is reliable, we need to know who these people are. So, in the field, in the library of hadith, there are books that are literally 40 plus volumes looking at the biography of every single person that's ever mentioned in a chain of narrators. By the way, this is called a chain of narrators. Let me repeat that. In the library of hadith, there are books of 40 plus volumes. You know how massive that is? You're talking about this. That look at the biography of every single person named in a chain of narrators. And so when somebody comes and says, oh, all this stuff is nonsense, ask them one question. How many books of hadith have you read? Just ask them that. There are literally tens of thousands of volumes written on hadith. And people come and say, oh, it's all nonsense. So what does it mean to study their biography? They look at three things. Number one, they look at the general life of this individual. When were they born and where? What year they died and where they traveled. The three things that they look at in terms of a person's life. Number one, their general life, which means what year were they born and where? What year did they die and where? And where did they travel to in their life? This is extremely important, as I'll get to. The second element of their biography that they look at is their character. Their character. Is this person upright in their ethics and their morals? Or no? Has this person ever lied? Yes or no? If their character is even slightly off, they consider the person not reliable. A scholar would go, they want to verify a hadith, so they'll go and they'll ask about John. So they go to John's city, where he was born, where he was raised, where he works, where his family is. Hey, I'm asking about John. Has John ever lied before? And a person comes and says, you know what? He lied to me once. That's it. He's done. He's out. He's out of this. Meaning any hadith where John is a narrator, that hadith is under scrutiny now. All right? And of course, there's more details here. I can't give it to you all. But the idea is if the person's character isn't upright, then we doubt their willingness and their integrity to narrate from the Prophet. Because remember, this is not reliable, this is not authentic until it tests out. So the first thing is their general life. The second thing is their character. Number 3, their competence. Specifically, their competence in memorizing, their ability to memorize. All right? How would they test a person's competence in memorization? They would test them. There were tests for this. You know, I would stand up. If I was going to be tested in terms of my memorization skills, what would they do? I stand up in front of a group of scholars, and they will start to throw information at me, throw hadith at me, throw chains of narrators at me. And then they will say, tell us what you just heard. Repeat to them what they just told me. Right? And then they'll give them a score. If they got 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 5 out of 10, what is their level of competency? And they'll look into that. They'll say, you know what, Michelle, you know, she checks out, her character is great, but her ability to memorize is a little bit weaker. So how much can we rely on this now? It affects it, right? So that's in terms of biographical studies. Any question on that? Now we look at the chain connection, these arrows right here. And we have individuals, but these individuals heard from other people. What do I need to do now? I need to make sure that Bob actually heard from John. Or else I can say, yeah, man, the other day I was with, Omar Suleiman and I heard him say this and that. That's just a claim. That's just a claim, right? And can that claim be challenged? Of course. In the court of law, if you are accused of something, you need a what? No, you're accused of something that you're innocent of. You need what? An alibi. An alibi, right? Where were you at the time of the crime? Now, if it was impossible for you to be at the place of the crime at the time of the crime, then that's an alibi, right? But if it's possible that you could have been there, then, there's now suspicion. So we're looking at this. How do we know that Bob actually was with John? Remember when I said, when we study their biography, we look at their travels? If Bob was born in the year 100 and died in the year 180, John was born in the year 190. Could Bob ever have seen John? No. I mean, John was born 10 years after Bob's death. They look at this. Okay, Bob was born in year 100, died in the year 180. John was born in the year 170 and died whatever after. Is it possible that John saw Bob? Yeah. But how old would have John been? 10 years old. So even though there could have been overlap, it's highly unlikely you took anything from John. Right? But if John was born in the year 150, is it possible they could have met? Okay, there's a check right there. Now we need to look at their travels. Bob never traveled. He only stayed in Southern California. When we look at John's travels, John traveled all of America except Southern California. Could they have met? No. And you see the idea here. 10 minutes, right? You see the idea here. They look at this connection. Is it possible? And then finally, the analysis of what the prophet actually said. Does this check out? Why? What does that mean? This can sound good, it checks out, but somebody, even though they are reliable, somebody could have made a mistake. They forgot in the moment. Or they misheard someone else say something. They mishear. So they analyze this. Right? So these are the three major components of determining whether a hadith is good or not. Any questions? Yes. I don't know if I'm understanding kind of how you're seeing it, but as I'm mentioning, the Prophet, as I mentioned earlier, the Prophet is essentially an extension of the Quran. And so when we say actions are based on intention, this is a very interesting study because of the chain itself, right? But actions are based on intention. You find this mentioned in the Quran dozens of times. So he's essentially explaining in different words what the Quran is already saying, right? But if you're talking about today, there's somebody who is a scholar of the Quran. Does that automatically make them a scholar of Hadith? No, not necessarily. No. 100%. 100%. Yeah. So for the sake of time, I'm going to continue here. As a result, what is the fruits of these studies? The scholars came up with ways in determining the strength of a hadith. And this is in order in terms of strongest to weakest. The strongest type of hadith is called mutawatir, or translated as mass transmission. What this means is so many people have relayed this information about the Prophet, it is impossible for it to be a lie. I'm going to give you an example. If somebody walks in right now and says, hey, don't take the 57 south because there's an accident blocking the entire highway, and the accident is between a black Toyota Corolla and a blue Honda Civic. Can that be a lie? You could be lying, right? Now, don't answer and say we could just look at Google Maps, right? One person coming and telling us this information, it could be true, it could be a lie, right? Now, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, someone else comes in and says, hey, don't take the 57 south because there's an accident blocking the entire highway between a black Toyota Corolla and a blue Honda Civic. And we know these two people don't know each other. What are we going to say? Is it true? Not maybe, it has to be true. What's the likelihood of two separate individuals making up the same exact lie? It's impossible. So when somebody in Morocco says that the Prophet said X, Y, and Z, and somebody in Persia says the Prophet says the same exact thing, and somebody in Yemen, what is the likelihood that that's just being made up? People from across the globe are making up the same exact lie? It's utter nonsense. So when a hadith is mass transmitted, we are 100% sure the Prophet said it. The next level is called sahih, or authentic. Sahih, authentic. What that means is, and these numbers, by the way, like I'm just kind of guesstimating here, so don't take it literally. We are 85 to 99% sure the Prophet said it. Okay? Next is Hasan, or what's called sound, or some people translate as reliable. We are 70 to 84% sure the Prophet said it. Next is a da'if, or a weak hadith. We're 45 to 69% sure the Prophet said it, but it's weak. You have very weak, da'if jiddan, it's 1%, 44% chance the Prophet said it. Then you have mawdu', fabricated, 0% chance, meaning it's an utter lie. Fabricated means an utter lie. And then la asla lahu, it has no basis. Remember that chain that I showed you? That doesn't even exist. Somebody comes and says the Prophet said this, and you look at, well, who Where is this coming from? There's nothing. So it's 0% reliable. All right, and remember, these numbers here, I'm just kind of guesstimating. I'm giving you an easier way for us in today's time to understand what sahih means. Okay? I'm sorry, I know I'm going very order. Now, these are names of books that you probably heard of. Bukhari. We've heard of Bukhari, right? Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi. These are called the 6 books of Hadith. They're not the only compilations of Hadith, but they are the most prominent compilations of Hadith. And how many have heard the phrase, everything that's in Bukhari, all Hadith in Bukhari is authentic? Who's heard this before? Right? So there's a very common phrase in the Muslim world that everything in Bukhari and Muslim is authentic. And what that means is if you open a random hadith in one of these 2 books, you are guaranteed to come across a authentic hadith. Anything that goes back to these 2, take it, the Prophet said it. Now, some people come and say, how can they say that? They say this because tens of thousands of scholars use the methodology that we said to scrutinize these 2 compilations of hadith, and they found that it all checks out. And it all checks out why? Remember that test, memorization test that I said? These books have different criteria. Bukhari will only accept a narrator if they are a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. That's it. Muslim will accept 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. And these other ones go down a little bit. Okay, why do they go down? So that they don't replicate what another one of these have done. And I don't have time to get into that just for the sake of time. But does that make sense? Muslims don't believe Bukhari and Muslim is authentic just because it feels nice. It's not just a slogan that we use. It is because scholars throughout the centuries scrutinize and analyze every single hadith. And they found that it checks out. Now, some scholars said, no, some of the hadith here are less than authentic. They're sound, but not authentic. But the idea is, the idea I want you to take from this is that scholars don't just accept things because, oh, Bukhari said it. Bukhari's a cool guy, you know, we're down with him, so we'll accept it. But, you know, this Ibn Majah guy, we're kind of half-half with him, and so we won't give him the same, you know, quality. That's not what's happening here. Scholars are actually scrutinizing this. And all this is available, by the way, right? It's available in the books that our libraries have. Okay, final points. The function of hadith is to expand on the Quran. It is not independent from the Quran. So if you imagine the Quran, it's the center. Extended from the Quran, you have the Prophet, you have hadith, you have fiqh, you have theology, you have these other things. The Quran is the center. Hadith is essentially another means of better understanding the Quran. Number 2, hadith does not establish the core foundations of faith, such as the pillars of Islam or primary beliefs. In other words, you will not find that a critical part of our religion is only in hadith and not in the Quran. Anything that is critical to our faith is in the Quran. And if hadith talks about it, it's simply expanding what's in the Quran. All right? Where you might find things that only hadith talks about are more of the secondary, tertiary issues that essentially explain certain principles or ideas in the Quran that the Quran doesn't spend time going through. Does that make sense? So somebody might come and say, how can I believe that in this when only the Prophet, why didn't Allah say it? That's not the way it works. If it's critical to our faith, it's in the Quran. And it might be in hadith as well. But if it's not critical to the faith, then you might find it in hadith and not in the Quran. And then finally, memorization was considered a necessary skill for scholars back in the day. If you're a Greek philosopher, if you are a Roman philosopher, part of you being a good scholar is your ability to orate for memorization. This is a very important point. Because in our times today, they look at something like hadith, how can they memorize all of this stuff? Just because you don't memorize doesn't mean it wasn't important back then. But they didn't have access to paper and printers and all of this stuff. So they relied on memorization. Part of being a good scholar is your ability to memorize. Today, that's not the case, right? But yesterday it was. And so these people who narrated hadith, they had incredible memory, incredible memory. And it's these people who are making their way into the chains of narrators. So I'll conclude there. I don't know if you have to actually end or not. I'm happy to field some more questions. But if we have to conclude, then we could talk maybe after, inshallah.
All right. Sheikh Tariq Atta, thank you so much. May Allah bless you. Let's get a loud Allahu Akbar on three. 1, 2, 3. Allahu Akbar. Allah bless you and reward you. I personally, I was just sitting back. I love you, man. I love you. Allah bless you. To simplify important topic like this, our brothers and sisters that are new to Islam, I really appreciate it, and how gentle and delicate. And again, forgive us for the issues with the mic. We'll do a fundraiser soon, inshallah, God willing. But I would definitely love to open up the floor for questions. I'm sure there's a number of questions, but we want to, of course, give preference to our brothers and sisters that are new to Islam, if that's okay. And then once that's like a mentor community, meaning part of the community would like to ask their questions, you're of course most welcome to do so. I'll take the first question here online from Sister Astrid, and I think you covered this, Sheikh Tariq, and that is, where can we find these books of hadith, these prophetic statements? I think you mentioned 6. If I can just maybe any suggestions for how a new Muslim should approach. Should they just open up Bukhari, or should they get a simplified book that compiles some of the basic hadiths just to start with? Your advice.
If you want to start off, I'd recommend the book, The Gardens of the Righteous, or Garden of the Righteous. This is pretty much every hadith there is authentic, with the exception maybe of two or three. But you don't have to worry about that. Why this book is extremely helpful is that it tends to focus more on hadith that are more applicable for day-to-day affairs, right? So it's the Garden of the Righteous because these are hadith that help build righteousness in your practice and in your hearts, all right? But let me put a disclaimer when it comes to studying hadith. Hadith is more complicated than Quran. The language that is used in hadith is more complex and complicated than the language used by the Quran. The Quran is simpler. The amount of words in the Quran, the vocabulary list of the Quran, is a lot smaller than hadith. And what ends up happening is you need to understand the culture, the context, the one asking, the one being asked. You need to understand more dynamics about what's going on in hadith than Quran. And so please, please, please take this as a rule. If something seems strange to you when it comes to a hadith, ask about it. Ask about it, because there's a very good chance you're misunderstanding it. Right? The Quran is simpler. Hadith is more complicated. So if there's anything strange that you're coming across in hadith that seems, wait a minute, this is not what I know Islam to be, or this doesn't make sense, or this seems off, write it down, ask. Send me a message, send me a WhatsApp message, right? A text message, you're more than welcome to. I'd be glad to answer it, because even Arabic speakers can very much misunderstand hadith. And I'll give you one example to show you how serious this is. Remember ISIS? Remember those guys? Yeah? Right? They would quote a hadith, an authentic hadith, where the Prophet says, I was commanded to fight people until they believe. And so ISIS used this to declare war against the world. Where are they today? They're 6 feet under. Let's just, on top of that, the death and destruction, the problems, the smearing of Islam that was enabled by their stupidity, all goes back to their misunderstanding of this hadith. Now, translated, right, it could be mistranslated as what I just said. I was commanded to fight the people. But when you look at what scholars said about this hadith, it wasn't the people. I was commanded to fight Quraysh, specifically his tribe. His tribe. And this isn't just a apologetic contemporary understanding. You go back 700 years, this is the majority opinion of scholars. That the people here is referring specifically to his own tribe. They misunderstood the hadith. Look how many people got killed as a result. So this is the sensitivity when it comes to hadith. If something doesn't make sense, a lot of it will make sense. But if something doesn't make sense, write it down, shoot me a question.
Thank you. Thank you. Always like a great pleasure listening to you speak. With the Institute of Knowledge, do you get like a master's degree in Islamic knowledge? Or
So great. I'm glad you asked that. Good to get to recruit. Alhamdulillah. Just let them know that you're from. I encourage you to go. So
okay.
They take care of me a little bit more.
Okay.
So IOK is meant to be a full Islamic studies, all of it. You're gonna get it all. And in year one, you take introduction to Hadith sciences, as you take introduction to Quranic sciences and Arabic language and others. So it's a up to 5 years. The first year you get an associate. The second year you get the second year you get I forgot. The third year you get a bachelor's, and fifth year you get a master's, right? So if you have the ability to enroll, do it. The students that I taught who went through all 5 years, I would be very comfortable allowing them space in my masjid to give talks, right? So there is so much to gain. If you can't do the full-time seminary, there are part-time courses. Take those. So there's a lot of value, as I've seen, as being a teacher. Therefore, I'm coming now on my 6th year, right? There's a lot of value. Do it. You can't do full-time. If you can do full-time, do it. If you can't do full-time, there are part-time courses. Take them.
Do you have to go in speaking Arabic?
I'm sorry?
Do you have to go in?
No, you go in to learn Arabic.
Great, thank you.
Now, if you get yourself ahead of the game, it helps a lot.
Okay.
Because the first 2 years are very Arabic tense.
Thank you.
Intense.
Okay.
Please forgive me, I forgot to mention that part of Shaykh Tarik as well. I know he doesn't like me to mention that, but he is also an instructor at IOK, or Institute of Knowledge, which is the seminary here in Diamond Bar. So for those of you that were here on Friday, Sheikh Mudathir, he's actually a graduate from the seminary program. He's also an instructor there, both full-time and part-time, along with Shaykh Tarik there as well. So thank you so much, Sheikh.
Does the Institute of Knowledge have courses on chaplaincy?
No, not chaplaincy. There's a chaplaincy program where they send they have employees where they send to universities. If you want something more of chaplaincy, I'd recommend Bayan Islamic Graduate School.
Bayan?
Bayan, Bayan, Islamic Graduate School. Now, this is an actual accredited graduate school. They have master's degrees and they have PhDs. I got a master's from Bayan. I'm actually working on starting my PhD at Bayan. They have chaplaincy studies. They have a lot of scholarship opportunities, so you can look into that.
And where are they located?
So they are currently in Chicago. However, their program is hybrid. What that means is it's built around the fact that their students are full-time employees, or they're well seasoned in their lives and they cannot be on site throughout the semester. So their courses are hybrid, and there's 1 week per semester where you fly out to Chicago and spend a week there for intensive course. So that they have chaplaincy programs.
Do they have any, are there any ones near here?
I'm sorry?
Are there any chaplaincy programs near here?
I don't know. You can always look. I'm not sure.
And then you were speaking about the Prophet, peace be upon him, wore anything that he had to wear.
Yes.
So then because it was brought up to me the other day, is it okay for me to wear something that's bright colored
Go for it.
versus some just black or tan or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it. You don't look weird in America wearing that. I'm talking about the colors.
Well, it works for me because people don't assume that I'm Muslim. If I'm fully dressed, they're like, tell their kids stay away from her. And then if I talk to the kids and they're like, wow, I thought you were Muslim. Well, yeah, I am, but I'm also a human being. So that's one of the reasons I do it. And also because I was always taught, even as a Christian, to dress for the Lord, and
Sure.
I like to think of him as a bright colored person, like the gardens of Jannah. So I'd like to dress in bright colors, but somebody was telling me that's haram.
No.
So it's not according to the Quran.
No. The way women in the Gulf of Arabia wear their clothing is not a reflection, in terms of colors, not a reflection of what Islam is saying.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Questions? We'll give it a few more questions and we'll call it a session.
It's for the people online.
Shaykh, thank you for the lecture. Background about myself, I grew up Muslim, family Muslim background. I'm here for a friend doing the revert process. And this process you talked about, the Hadith and how we go about researching how the accuracy. I didn't know this growing up. There was times where I had considerations. How do we know that this wasn't translated or misrepresented? And by learning this, it's actually very beautiful because there's truth, there's known truths, and then there's the way the process that goes about it is just very beautiful, and it really just reinforces that the accuracy of it.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to bring that up because I grew up Muslim and I didn't know that there was this process for it. So it's very beautiful to know.
Good. Glad you enjoyed.
Questions?
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
You brought up the order of the hadiths, like the people.
Mhm.
Are they companions or is it like?
No, these aren't companions. These individuals were in the 3rd century.
Okay. So they're kind of like, they just kind of do the tests of the hadiths, or?
No, so they're kind of the zenith of hadith studies. So remember, hadith studies is growing, and then the fruit of all of that work is pretty much these 6 compilations. So they're building off about 250 years of scholarly inquiry and research and whatnot.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sure.
Shaykh, the next question was on this specific slide. We mentioned Bukhari and Muslim. Can you just explain to us who is Bukhari, who is Muslim? Because if I'm not mistaken, I think many of them were non-Arabs.
Oh yeah.
And they mastered the
All
science
6 of
hadith.
these.
The reason I'm saying that is because we are blessed with so many people with diverse ethnic backgrounds, and sometimes they might see it as a hurdle to learn the Arabic language. Yet we see people that are not Arab, and they, as a sense of encouragement.
And none of these 6 individuals were Arab. They all come from pretty much Central Asia. What's now Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Bukhari is the name of a city, Bukhara. That's actually become a tourist site these days. He's Uzbeki, right? I'm not sure exactly where the others, their exact geographical location, but there's pretty much Central Asia, Persia, Northern Persia. So it's very interesting. All people who wanted to contribute to Islam had the opportunity to do that. And, as Islam begins to grow very quickly in the Hispanic, Latin community, I hope you come with that mindset, right? You have something to offer. You have something to contribute. Do not feel that you are in any way less capable of doing something significant for the faith simply because you weren't born a Muslim, or because your first language is in Arabic, or because you're not of the majority, if you want to even call that majority, ethnicities. This is not the case, right? So embrace your heritage, embrace your culture. Remember that if the Prophet was living now and you were to present him a Latin style of clothing, he probably would have wore it, right? So do something, contribute, offer something. You have something to offer. None of these were Arabs, none of them.
Thank you so much, Shaykh. I appreciate it. Anybody with the last question that wants to close it out? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam to Allah.
So you mentioned like 8 levels of reliability. What were the last 2 of like hadith?
The last 2 is fabricated and no basis.
Thank you.
That which is fabricated means it's straight up lied. Like I gave you the example of an apple, right? Buy apples or eat apples because the Prophet said, eat apples because they're good for you. The Prophet said, eat apples because they're good for you. This is just a straight up lie, right? So it's fabricated. No basis means there is no chain of narrators. This right here, this part right here doesn't exist. That's what no basis means. So if this doesn't exist, can we test it? No. So no basis. It has zero reliability.
All right, Shaykh Tarik Atta, religious director at OCIF. Please give it up for dear Shaykh Tarik. I have to say, Shaykh, every time you come, you deliver in such a beautiful and easy way for us to kind of digest the information, right? Do you guys agree? I don't think I heard it. Do you guys agree? Excellent. I really appreciate
you coerce them. I mean, what are they supposed to say? No.
They say it, but I only heard it from this side. I know, but and I'm so sorry if we went a little bit over time. I was just kind of zooming out. I saw there's people taking notes here. The attention was there, so I didn't want to break that rhythm in terms of the everybody come along with this discussion here. So please forgive us if we went slightly over, but I think it was very beneficial for everyone. Everybody streaming online as well, I pray it was very beneficial for you there as well. I do have the slides, so if anybody is interested, just go ahead and shoot me a message, and I'll be more than happy to get the slides, the Shaykh Tarik, as you see here, over to you folks as well, inshallah, God willing. A few announcements, and we'll call it a session. Number one, I just want to thank Sister Claudia for translating today. Sister Claudia, thank you so much. May Allah reward you and bless you. As I remind myself, and by extension everybody else, sometimes you hear some like side conversations happening, and we as humans, we just turn over, just kind of say, hey, what's going on, and then we just forget that it's one of our sisters or sometimes one of our brothers that's actually translating. So if you heard something going on in this area, that was simply our dear Sister Claudia doing her best in the corner, just trying to translate. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. For those that are listening to this conversation in Spanish, I hope it was beneficial. If we can improve in any way in terms of the audio quality or anything like that, please do let us know. Thank you so much. Number two, I'm very happy to announce our dear Sister Janet or Sister Sumaya Al-Gohari is here. How many of you are familiar with our dear Sister Sumaya? She's like a pillar here at IIOC. She embraced Islam many, many years ago. And if I'm not mistaken, till today, I always get this wrong, but 15, right? 15 people in her family have become Muslim. 15, man. 15 people have become Muslim. And she even goes back to Mexico, mashallah, and she's giving da'wah and calling people to Islam. And may Allah reward you, Sister Sumaya, for all the wonderful work you're doing. I have a short, just a tidbit that I would like to read, inshallah, God willing. So Sister Sumaya, last year, she created 2 insightful books in the Wisdom from the Quran series, featuring reflections from esteemed scholars and heartfelt forwards by Shaykh Farhan Zubairi and our own Shaykh Tarik Atta, with Sister Sumaya work with. Reflections from healing the heart and understanding the significance of family touched many hearts with their profound wisdom. This year, Sister Sumaya brings us 2 new activity books, 99 Names of Allah, Meaning, Calligraphy, and Color. Dive dive deep into the beauty of Allah's names through enriching coloring pages and designed for reflection and contemplation. And second, beautiful mosques. Immerse yourself into the serenity or in the serenity of the Quranic verses through intricate coloring pages. All books are available both in English and Spanish. And so she is selling the books over here. So I would hope and I would pray that after the session is finished in a few minutes, you guys would visit the table. You would support our sister. As you guys know, we're very big when our brothers and sisters embrace Islam and they're entrepreneurs or they're authors or they're starting something halal. We want to support them, man. We want to support them. So if I would be very happy if she sells out today, like sold out sign that goes up, right? In like 10 minutes. So please get one for yourself. And if you can get it for someone else, that'll be great. Again, she has it both in English and Spanish. And Sister Sumaya is very kind. She's donating some of the proceeds today from her sales to the Dawah and New Muslim program, which is very kind of her. So please, again, make sure to visit our dear Sister Sumaya there as well. Number 2, yes. Most welcome. Number 2, just as a friendly reminder, we're blessed that we work with many different community organizations, and ICNA Relief is one of them. As I'm saying that, I think Abdullah just stepped out. But ICNA Relief, as you guys know, we have our food distributions, we have our diaper distributions. We partner with ICNA Relief. They have a women's shelter, they have counseling, they have food pantry, they have a lot of resources. And so once a year, they have their annual banquet. And their banquet is coming up on Saturday, September 7th at the Hilton Anaheim. They have Dr. Rania Awad and Dr. Yasser Qadi, both of them coming. So if you haven't as of yet purchased your ticket, I would hope you would consider supporting that organization and going as well, God willing, inshallah. I know IOC will be representing the masjid there as well. I think many different mosques and organizations will be there as well. So please make sure to pencil that in. That is going to be Saturday, September 7th. And you can just kind of go to ICNA Relief online. Of course, their office is here in Fullerton to make sure you purchase your tickets. Third, our New Muslim graduation. Again, friendly reminder, it's going to be on September 22nd, Sunday, September 22nd. We are blessed that we're going to have our next New Muslim graduation. For those of you, if you're not familiar with it, when somebody becomes Muslim, it's very important for us to be there with them on that journey to learn about the basics of Islam. So we have mentors that will work with them one-on-one. And so when they complete how to pray, and they complete our different levels, we actually then celebrate that in the form of a graduation. So that's coming up less than about 4 weeks. For those of you that are in the mentorship program, again, show of hands, how many of you are enrolled in the mentorship program? Just a few hands. I know some of you are a part of it. You're just not raising your hand. But okay. But remember, the deadline to register for your exams is September 1st. So that's in a few days. So again, for those of you that are just trying to get it in, do your best. It's Saturday, September 1st or Sunday, September 1st. So please make sure to get your exams in by then, God willing. And don't forget to register. Please don't wait to the last minute. As you guys know, once we hit capacity, we can't take any more people because we're maxed out. And this has happened to us a number of times. We thank Allah for people responding and registering, but don't wait till the last minute. So please register if you haven't as of yet registered. The WhatsApp scam, how many of you are, unfortunately, I have to talk about this. How many of you are familiar with this little hack or scam that's going on? Sheikh, have you been hearing about this in your community? Yeah. So it's been going on in this community, unfortunately, and then other communities by extension. What typically happens is, has anybody got that call? Show of hands. A little bit higher. Okay. That's like 50, almost 40% of the class. Okay. For those of you, if you haven't got the call, may Allah bless you, may Allah protect you. What happens is somebody will call and they will say, we're from the IIAUC mosque or any other mosque. And they'll say, we have a Zoom meeting tonight. I'm going to send you an access code. Please send me that access code. Right? And so when you give them that access code, they've now hacked into your WhatsApp. Okay. And this has happened to a number of people. There's some people that said, Brother Jamal, for a second, they almost had me. Because they'll say IIOC. And so you hearing it and you're in between things or you're at work, you're like, okay, legitimate, cool, no worries. IIOC said it, I'll give them this code. And then you figure out 5 seconds later, oh, wait, hold on. Actually, no way. As you know, we would never do that. You would know well in advance if we're going to have some type of a Zoom session. We would not send you an access code. You would have the link to come right on the Zoom, right? So please, please, please. Unfortunately, some people, they have given the access code. And unfortunately, some people have lost money in these type of scams as well, right? So I just want to make sure that I remind myself and you here as well, and inshallah your community as well, Shaykh Tarik, that this is going around. And they just I have had at least 4 people in the last few days that have told me they've called. So they're literally targeting different people in communities, right? So please, again, if it doesn't sound right, it doesn't look right, Help me out. It's not right, man. It's not right, right? And if you're not sure about something, get a second pair of eyes to check it out. So to say, you know what, especially if somebody has a, if you will, a cybersecurity background, it's really good just to check it out before clicking any link or anything like that. So please make sure to not do something like that. Again, it is going around. A few more announcements. We do need help with volunteers, particularly in the kitchen. So if I can ask some of the volunteers to hang out and help us out, I would greatly appreciate it. Of course, we have food and drinks left over. So on your way out, make sure to grab something so that there's nothing left here. Our little donation box, brothers and sisters, as you guys know, to help us offset our expenses, we have a little donation box for the program. There's a QR code, or you can just drop in some cash. Whatever works for you, we would really appreciate it. And lastly, again, I just want to welcome those that are new to our community, particularly for the first time. As you know, those that were here, I want to welcome our sisters Isabel. If you can just raise your hand. She embraced Islam right after prayer today, along with Sister Pamela. If you can just raise your hand. Both of them embraced Islam. They became Muslim right after prayer. So welcome. I want to also welcome Jamaica. Jamaica's right over here. If you can just raise your hand. Again, Jamaica's first time at the mosque. So welcome, Jamaica. I hope it was beneficial for you. Thank you very much for taking time out. We appreciate it. I want to also, Jazik, can you just raise your hand? You guys, if you remember, on Friday, I had announced during class that there was a brother after the first sermon who right here, literally 15, 20 feet away in the lobby, became Muslim. He did his shahada. That's our dear brother, Jazik. Jazik, can you just raise your hand, please? Jazik's story is that he works at Kamaria, and the brothers there, they're just good Muslims that he was around. They brought him to the Friday sermon. By his choice, he wanted to come, of course. And then just being around Muslims, hearing the sermon that day and coming out, you know, Allah bless him, opened up his heart, he embraced Islam, literally right over here. Right over here. So Jazik, welcome to the family, my brother. Very happy to have you with us, God willing, inshallah. So since last Sunday till today, we're blessed. We have had 4 people that became Muslim. Just from last Sunday till today, 4 people. Again, I don't want us to get into the numbers. I'm not saying that for the numbers. What I'm saying is that Islam is growing and it's beautiful. But you need to make sure you're there. You need to make sure you're welcoming. You need to make sure you check in with people. If you see somebody that's new in this community or any other community, please don't be reactive. Don't just sit back and be like, okay, they'll figure it out. No, be the first one to approach them. Say, hey, how are you? Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. My name is so-and-so. Are you new here? If so, help them out. Maybe they're looking for the restroom. Maybe they're looking for the Shaykh. Maybe they're looking for the school. I don't know. But just be the first one that comes with that welcoming smile, embraces them, and just kind of helps them out. Because that first time somebody comes to a mosque is very important. And then every time after as well, right? So just do your best within your capacity to make sure that you are welcoming people, particularly our brothers and sisters that are new to Islam, whether it's in this community or any other community, because sometimes, or many times, they might be the only Muslim in their household, right? So this is our family, right? So I want to thank you all very much on a Sunday. We went well over, so please forgive me, but we're just having a good time. So thank you all very much, everybody streaming online. May Allah reward you. And lastly, if you guys can help me out with the tables and chairs, I would greatly appreciate it. We have racks on both sides. We'll go ahead and fold up the tables. If you see any trash, if you can get rid of that, I'll appreciate it. And chairs on the racks as well. Shaykh Tarik, as always, may Allah bless you and reward you. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. We see everybody on Friday. Assalamu alaikum.